Hello, everybody, and welcome to our workshop this week with the University of Ethereum. My name is Rachel, and I'm your host today. And it is Valentine's Day today. So for all of you tuning in, thank you. And I just want to express our love and appreciation from the University of Ethereum. And also, shout out to the team of the University of Ethereum for continuing to make this work possible. And folks like Vitalik and the Ethereum Foundation, again, for making this work possible. We would not be here without you. So yeah, thank you for everyone that supports and continues showing up to these workshops every week. We're grateful for you. And yeah, I'm really excited to bring up a guest today, someone that I've known for years who has really been making waves in the space and has lived up to his name, Above Average Joe. So yeah, let's bring Above Average Joe up. Welcome, man. Yeah, we've done some work together over the years, man. And every time I work with you, Joe, it's just an absolute pleasure. I'm always learning from you. I'm always learning new things and just continuously impressed with the work that you're doing in the BanklessDAO community and the broader Web3 space. So yeah, Joe, I'll pass it over to you to give your introduction, man.
Well, I'm honored to get such a shout out, and I do strive to live up to the name. So glad to hear that so far, so good. I am Above Average Joe, as was mentioned. And I guess if you want to know a little bit about me, I am a crypto native who's been in the industry for a decade now. And it is a unique perspective to be one of the early adopters. And I have come from a blue collar background and have evolved into a full-time Web3 native. And I'm hoping to share with you guys a little bit of what that's like, from starting as a handyman, which is where Above Average Joe, the name, comes from, and making my way full-time Web3 and surviving and thriving through bull or bear.
Awesome. Yeah. And Joe, we did some really great work. Was it last year with ETH Denver on our event we did, and really loved your talk that you gave on creating a more equitable future for individuals. And yeah, again, like I said, always learning from you and always impressed with your willingness to show up for community like BanklessDAO. Like, you were on the first BanklessDAO community call, right?
I was.
You're like one of the
I was actually helping organize.
Yeah, I know your reputation is really great in that community. And yeah, I'm curious if we can just break down a little bit about what we'll be talking today about with our listeners, with our viewers, and our members of the University of Ethereum. I do want to state just a small disclaimer that if you're listening to this, none of this is financial advice. This is all purely for educational purposes. So just wanted to put that out there before we dive in here.
Absolutely. I'm going to be talking about the store of value paradigm, which is one of the things that brought me into the Web3 space to begin with, and what that transition from fiat to store of value based mindsets looks like in practice. And hopefully I can give you guys some of the nuggets of wisdom I've gained over the last 10 years and speed up your own journeys by a couple of cycles, because 10 years is a long time in the space, and I hope you guys are all around here in 10 years from now. But this is hopefully going to set you up to build on my shoulders and go farther and faster than I could imagine. And so, yeah, looking forward to sharing all of those details.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll bring up the presentation. Yeah, before we dive in, I'm curious, Joe, what your shirt says. It says SBF.
It says SBF owes me nothing. Own your assets, which awesome. I think is quite apropos.
Awesome, cool. Well, thanks for sharing, and yeah, let's get your presentation up and go ahead and dive in here.
Right on. So, for the University of Ethereum, we are doing the store of value paradigm applied, because theory only goes so far. So, I have given this presentation a little bit of an old world vibe. That's a nod to my Bankless fam, because we're always headed west. And so with that, I'll give you guys a little bit more insight into what my decade of the journey has been for. 2013, in the old days when magic was written, I heard about Bitcoin on the radio at $50. And I thought, this is weird. I don't understand how internet money can work. but I can't let it go. Something feels real about this. Like, it could be a scam, but I got to pay attention. Something's cool. And through Bitcoin, I learned what the properties of money are. There are three main aspects. There is the unit of account, the medium of exchange, and the store of value. And we'll be focusing on the store of value today. So I'll be ignoring a little bit of those money properties for now, because this is the one that I think is most applicable to my journey. Not long after I had heard about it on the radio, I picked up a USB stick ASIC miner. For those who have been in the industry for a while, you know how long it's been since those were viable. I didn't know anyone in the industry, so I wound up getting that off of Craigslist, and I spent around $200 for that little miner, and it was an interesting endeavor to explore how to mine Bitcoin, but I got it figured out. And once I did, I saved up what I earned until things started to look a little toppy, right around the $1,000 mark. And I thought, this is great, but I'd like to turn it into some cash because it's worth $1,000 now, and I don't know who to sell it to. So I put my money into Mt. Gox, and 2 days later, it got hacked, and I'm still waiting on that settlement 11 years on. So I learned the lesson of not your keys, not your coins, real quick, and with a rather heavy club over my head. And I was rather upset about learning this lesson through School of Hard Knocks. So I unplugged my USB stick miner and let it collect dust on my shelf until 2017. Probably not my greatest choice, but that's the nature of the cycle whenever you're not yet convicted of its value proposition. In that 2017 timeframe, the price of Bitcoin crossed 7K, and I went, I think I still have a little bit of dust somewhere in my old mining pool. So I went back, I found it. Sure enough, I had a little bit, and I said, with what I've seen over the last couple of years and what I know now, this is definitely life changing. And so I'm not going back. And I made a one-way trip down the crypto rabbit hole at that point, and I wanted to get connected. So I started looking for anything I could on crypto, and I found a guy by the name of David Hoffman and his buddy CK Snarks, who were doing a podcast where they would go back and forth as Bitcoiner and Ethereum. And the conflict that they had with each other's mindset was really enlightening, because it brought forth the nuance that each asset class had. And I was hooked. Shortly after that, Ryan Sean Adams hosted the Bankless newsletter. And not long after that, David joined up with him and they started their podcast, which really kicked off Bankless proper. And I said, I want to follow these guys. They're going to be big. They talk what I expect for the industry, and the information I've gained from them is invaluable. A lot of it is what I'm going to be sharing with you guys here today. For instance, things like credible neutrality, the idea that the asset class is only as valuable as its resilience against manipulation. So if there's a level playing field, then everybody has an equal opportunity to win. And that helped me to find my why. Why am I in crypto? Because things like banks, and particularly central banks, have this tendency to siphon your wealth away through things like inflation. And I wanted a paradigm where my wealth was protected. And I wanted to make sure that the rest of the world knew that there is a better way. Back in the 60s, the United States went off of the gold standard, and things have devalued since then. And I wanted to be part of a stronger currency system like those times, where there's real backing behind the assets I am using. And so I decided to do a little bit of math here. And and figure out just how much that USB ASIC was worth and what the value of my money would have done over the last decade used it different ways. So, assuming I had spent $200 for that USB miner, if I had just let inflation happen, it was $260 change in order to per same miner with ignoring all of the value changes that go with it. And so it's roughly a 31% inflation between 2013 and now. Pretty significant. But there's this thing called a treasury bond that the Federal Reserve offers, which is essentially a risk-free rate on your assets, a way to protect against that inflation. And if you were to put that money into years, like last 10 years, earned $50.52 in interest, which leads to a net loss of your purchasing power of about 3.5%, even though you were putting it into a safe place where arguably protected and risk mitigated. So the best option I had in the fiat system would have still cost me 3.5%. But I was interested also in what the store of value would have been like if I had taken the $200 at the miner, just bought some Bitcoin and held it for that decade. So I did the math, and the average price of Bitcoin when I bought that miner was around $130. So if I had spent that $200, I would have gotten 1.53 and change Bitcoins. No small potatoes. At the recent valuation of 47K, it was 72 grand. Motto is, which is a massive change from that measly $252. So, where did all of that stored value come from? Where did it go? And what would I have gotten if I had put my money in that T-bill and bought in that Bitcoin today? I would have come out with 0.005 Bitcoin. So I still would have had a certain amount of assets, but the amount that I could have picked up was drastically reduced. And the expansion of the Bitcoin network, the more people that use it, the larger that asset became and created that multiplier that you see on the bottom of the left-hand side here of 276 times the initial valuation. And by putting your assets into something that is finite and value stored, I could have come out way ahead using Bitcoin. And I found that to be astounding how much value we are putting out there and then watching get pulled from underneath us silently through inflation and the debasement of the assets we hold. Because every time the Federal Reserve prints another dollar into circulation, rather than that value accruing to you, it's being diluted from you. And that kind of wealth siphoning is arguably the biggest theft of a generation. So, this led me into a store of value mindset over the course of the last decade. What is it that keeps that value safe? And how does it change the way that I look at the world? First off, it's a mindset change. If I'm in a system where my purchasing power tomorrow is worth less than it is today, my natural incentive is spend it right away because I'm not going to get as much for it tomorrow. And so that leads to using the money as fast as you can get it or faster, getting into debt. And not saving, because saving in an asset that erodes might not really get you very much at the end of the game, especially as time does its compounding thing. And by thinking in terms of the finite asset, we're able to reverse that theft of our value capture over time. And with Bitcoin, the finite supply is the strongest thing that is in its favor. It's also the first cryptocurrency, which will forever give it a claim to fame. But shortly after that, Ethereum came along and it did something that Bitcoin didn't. It was the internet where Bitcoin was email. It had the ability to provide a new layer of computational capacity. Instead of just sending one asset to another person, you could do new things. You could collateralize your assets and then borrow against it. You could turn around and make streaming payments to somebody of their wages. You could do anything that you can program into a computer on the ETH network. And that meant that more than just a store of value, you had the full flexibility of an entire monetary system. And that was something to me that I couldn't let go of. It led to me going from Bitcoin native to Ethereum native. And as I did that, my mindset went from thinking about how many dollars it was worth to how much of the percent of the network share it was worth. And that type of paradigm shift is the main core of what I want to share with you guys today. It's changing the way that you relate to your money because you want your money to work for you, not against you. And this ecosystem helps that happen. And as far as when it happens, it wasn't all at once. It wasn't like I bought my first Bitcoin and then the light came on. I had this slow evolution that was happening day by day. And I didn't even realize it was happening until one day I woke up and my assets were being priced in ETH in my head. I wasn't looking at it and caring about the dollar because the dollar would be there when I needed it. Yeah, I've got to pay my bills there. But when I'm asking myself, am I accruing wealth? Do I have more Ether than I did the day before? And that kind of mindset has really changed what it means to relate to money. And when it came to how I did these sorts of things, there is a desire to control your risk. So I could have put everything in, but then had ETH or Bitcoin gone down, I would have exposed myself to the risk of the asset class and potentially lost more than I could afford to. So being able to scale my participation into a risk level that I could afford was one of the first steps I made. By controlling the risk, I'll never lose more than I could stomach. And so that created for me a base from which to work. And then I got my hands dirty. I saw the value of looking at the networks. But until I started making transactions and playing with the networks and getting into the weeds of doing, I didn't really understand a ton. I could see a lot of the theory, I could hear it described, but it was internalized when I did it because experience is a teacher that will not fail. It will always tell you the things that actually happen. And where theory comes to its limits, experience is just putting its shoes on and getting ready to go. And then I had a decade, the fourth dimension of time. That gave me the ability to let the purchasing power of a finite system to do its work. If my purchasing power is being eroded in the fiat ecosystem, then by protecting it, the longer time goes on, the more valuable that purchasing power becomes. And so, using the length of time, I was able to find a larger base than I would have otherwise by using things like collateralized lending and then borrowing for my living expenses and making sure that I was maintaining those assets. I was effectively getting access to the funds I needed for the day, but I wasn't really selling the store of value asset. And so as time went on, my money continued to work for me. And It's definitely a risky strategy. So I don't recommend doing so lightly. It's not financial advice. There's a lot of detail that goes into it that I don't have time to cover here today. So definitely don't jump in blind. But using tools that are in the DeFi ecosystem, I was able to discover a wealth preservation pathway. And this did things to change how I behaved with my money. Because the first thing that comes is the thought paradigm. The second thing that comes is what you do. And what you do matters, because you can talk all day, but until you put your money where your mouth is, you're not actually going to see the results. And that meant things like thinking about opportunity costs. When I had to weigh, do I really need this thing? Or do I want to store that value for what I can potentially get with my Bitcoin tomorrow? That changed the way that I looked at a purchase. Is this thing worth more than it is going to generate for me in a given time frame? Or is it going to erode my purchasing power after I get it? A car is a great example. The moment you drive it off the lot, it loses a ton of value. And the opportunity cost of buying that car versus holding the Bitcoin over another couple of months really changes the question of, is this purchase worth it? And that affects the mindset that you go with in subtle ways. I often say that it's easy to spend $1 to make two. But if I'm going to do something that isn't going to make $2, is the utility it provides me worth that opportunity cost? And that really changes the way that you look at your spending and your consumptive habits, which are a completely opposite incentive structure in the fiat paradigm where your value is eroded. So spend it now. And it also led me to think about things like anti-fragility. Because I was using collateralized lending, I never wanted to sell my assets. I wanted to use them as a lever to pay for my living expenses and go about life. And by protecting that store of value in the collateral, I was creating a system of anti-fragility, one where I was not going to be disrupted by the day to day. That resilience is something that builds a future as time goes on. It creates a solution before the problem arrives, and that helps reduce the impact of the problems when they show up. And understanding things like the monetary system, the difference between fiat and the store of value assets like Bitcoin and Ethereum, that kind of education became highly desirable. I began seeking information that made me better with money, because money goes where it's treated well. And so I wanted to treat my money well, and that meant knowing what to do with it. And that education usually started in history. If I didn't know what the history of money was, I wouldn't understand the lessons that came from experienced people before. And so I sought that history. I learned about what it was that made our money the way it is now. And I learned the power of sovereignty. Like, in that history, you see the ownership of your assets eroded by those who issue the currency. And when they do that sort of thing, they are slowly stealing your sovereignty from you, which forces you to take positions that you might not otherwise want to take, because you can't afford things that are in a fragile state. So building that sovereignty in day by day is something that I was really interested in developing. And I also learned about the constant vigilance that is required to be successful in a sovereign world. When you take on all of that power, you're also responsible for protecting it. And that means you can't be idle with your assets. And that was something that was core in my belief, that I can't just participate in the ecosystem. I have to be proactive to understand what the scammers are doing and stay away from anything that opens that door for them, to make sure that I am holding my keys so that I actually own my coins, not keeping them on a centralized exchange any longer than is necessary. And things like that have modified the way that I behave with my money. And that in turn is helping protect my future. So, what does this mean if I am trying to apply this newfound knowledge? It means that I look at things like the charts in the crypto world and I go, which one of these is going to tell me the most accurate information I need for the future? And how do I tell which chart is noisier? And one of the things that stood out to me was that in this store of value world, the assets that are paired in trade are the ones that matter. You might value it in dollars in terms of what you get at the end of the day. But if you want to know whether or not that asset is gaining value or losing value, you need to know what it's being traded against and remove the noise from those charts. So I brought up a couple of examples here, Chainlink and our BanklessDAO token. And we'll ignore the values of those in the finite terms right now. What we're paying attention to is where those charts look different. You'll notice the two lines, the teal and the purple, are not identical. And that's because one is priced in Ether and the other is priced in USD. The assets that are paired most in USD, that Ether chart is a little more noisy because any deviation in the price of Ether creates a change against that paired asset that isn't necessarily correlated to its change in value. And then Bank, the counterpoint, is paired almost completely in Ether. And so anytime the price of Ether moves, the USD value develops noise. And that means that looking at where the liquidity is supplied, what you can trade your assets against, and how much you can trade against those assets can tell you an awful lot about whether or not the asset is actually moving in the direction you think it is. And that kind of application will make you a better trader if you're trading. And when it comes to the question of finding the good deal, this is the part that I'm still learning on. So take it with a grain of salt. But the value that shows up inside of these ecosystems can be measured in a lot of ways. You hear about things like market cap. That's the value of the asset. And there are several ways to count the market cap. So we've got fully diluted. That's the price times the total supply. You've got the circulating. That's the assets that are being traded or are in people's wallets and multiplied by the regular price of the moment. So you get the types of circulating from things like let's use BanklessDAO. Their treasury assets are technically not circulating because the DAO treasury isn't spending them at that moment. And so nobody can sell them, nobody can supply them as liquidity. They effectively are out of circulation. But when you put them into circulation, giving them to a DAO contributor, then that increases the circulating token supply. And that metric is different than the fully diluted. And then there's the liquid market cap. This is the one that you don't see on CoinGecko, and that is a little more rare. It takes some homework in order to figure out exactly what that liquid market cap is. So the liquid supply is one that you can calculate by the amount of tokens you can buy without making a private deal. And one of my favorite ways to figure out what that is to go onto a automated asset aggregator. DeFi Llama is a good example of one. And put in an obnoxiously large trade. It'll end up with massive slippage, like 99%. But even if you can't actually buy it, it'll tell you, if I had an infinite amount of money, how much could I get? Because a finite supply will only get halfway across the room. It'll never actually buy all of the assets. And so you can see how close you can get if you spend a ton of money. And you'll also notice it's more efficient as you spend a smaller amount. So if I spent 1 Ether or 10,000 Ether on buying bank tokens, that 1 Ether will get me the first 5% of the circulating supply. But that other like 999 Ether is only going to get me another 80%. And so the more you buy, the less efficient it becomes. And when you're asking yourself, when is it a good deal to buy? The question of slippage is something that is often seen as an enemy. But if you are able to purchase more of the circulating supply or the fully diluted supply even than the percentage of slippage, then in theory you're coming out ahead. Obviously that depends on things like whether or not somebody else buys the asset after you or anything like that. There are a lot of different variables here, so it's not something to think about on its own. But when you look at the ratios between the liquid supply and the amount of slippage for the purchase you're making, you can kind of get an idea of how efficient it is. And the more supply you have, the easier it is to manipulate the market. So you might be able to identify when somebody else is manipulating the market because you recognize when they have a amount of supply large enough to do a thing in the commodities world that's known as cornering the market, which is where you own enough that you can manipulate the price up or down such that you always win. In a casino like that, if you don't know whether or not you're making a winning trade, you're probably not going to win the trade. And it's hard to know what that is in advance. There is a card game that I played as a kid growing up called Pit, and I strongly recommend playing that card game. It's effectively putting yourself onto a commodities trading floor and pretending to trade these assets to try to corner the market. And it'll teach you an awful lot about liquidity dynamics. And that was arguably the first nugget that led me towards store of value mindsets. So when you look at the way that you price your assets, what they're paired against, and the ratios of how much you can get versus how much you spend are very important. And those types of things will lead to the evolution of your future day by day. When I went full time in the crypto space, which was 2019, I founded a company called DeFipedia. I thought there's this world of terminology in the crypto space that I cannot understand. And I can't find any resources to explain what all these terms are. I'm just asking people on Twitter, what was that acronym you just used? And I recognized that as a gap in the market. So I tried to fill it and create an encyclopedia of terminology and projects that describe what was in the space so that the people who came after me had an easier time learning. And I was able to get an initial investment from a very generous ETH ICO purchaser of $88,000. And I used the Maker protocol to collateralize that USD into Ether and then mint DAI for my business expenses month by month. And I let time work to preserve my purchasing power as I ran my company. I was not particularly successful. I had a lot to learn about being a founder and compliance and things like that. But the strategy that I took, storing my value in Ether and only taking what I needed from it, led to an eventual expenditure of over 200K of operating capital that I didn't have any revenue to add to. That was purely store of value protection. And that meant that I was able to build with that protocol much longer than that initial runway gave me. And that kind of thing is an illustration of what this purchasing power strategy can provide for you if you are maintaining it and thinking about it critically. And what does that mean for you if you want to try and do something like this? I don't know. That is dependent on what your goals and objectives are in life. Would it unlock for you something like financial independence? Would it give you the freedom to create a project like DeFipedia that you're passionate about? Would it help you recapture your time, which is the ultimate commodity because you can't make more of it? You can spend it efficiently or not, but you can never buy another day. And so it is the commodity that is the most valuable. And if you can capture that back, you're doing an awful lot to give yourself sovereignty. And what exactly that store of value unlocks for you is up to you. And that's one of the beauties of using a store of value mindset. It gives you your power back. So if you've got that power, what do you do with it? Where do you start? How do you protect that store of value? Because if you store your value, but you can't protect it, Mt. Gox, then what does that mean? For me, probably an 85% haircut on those Bitcoins I was holding. Instead of that 72 grand, I'm going to have like 3 or 4. But if I had held my own assets and protected it, I would have had the whole value. And so those lessons can be much more expensive in the future than they look today. And it's worth learning early on. And if you want to know where to learn about some of these things, how to set up your wallets in such a way that the scammers can't touch you, I recommend coming to a place like Boring Security, which is a group that is financed out of the ApeCoin ecosystem and is run by a few good friends of mine that I've met over the years in the crypto space. And they provide a free educational course. They've got a 101 and 102 class these days. So there's multiple levels that you can learn in terms of what tools and resources are available to help make you more effective at protecting your money. And these guys are offering these courses as a public good. It's totally free. All you've got to do is sign up and show up. And if you do, they'll give you an NFT that certifies that you have completed the course once you're done. And you can use that to vote in their Boring Security DAO on the futures of their protocol. So not only do you get the education that makes you more effective, you also get plugged in to that learn by doing. And I cannot emphasize that enough. Learning by doing is the key. If you stop at theory, you're only going to go so far. But if you aren't safe in your approaches as you go forward, then it might cost you a lot, which is why you should make sure you never put in more than you are willing to lose. It is a risky game. And Boring Security is there to help you get the best out of it. And I appreciate those guys for what they do every day because I hate me some scammers. I've seen a lot of good people hit in this industry. And even if you think you're good, it only takes one moment. And so vigilance is key. And things like Boring Security are the first step that I absolutely recommend in growing your own journey. And if that's not enough, you can always jump into things like the Bankless Academy program, where the DAO that I am part of from the beginning has worked to develop educational content that will bring you guys a nuanced understanding of what it means to be in this ecosystem. Because it's a decade in, and I still feel like a noob. There's a lot to learn here, and it evolves every day. And we want to make sure that that journey is as easy as possible for you guys. So those are a few of the basic resources that I can recommend getting started. But I hope that this gives you guys a glimpse into not just what's possible, but how much power is there that is being stolen from you a little bit at a time, and how easy it is to protect it by using sovereign assets. And with that, I am at the end of my presentation for now, so we can open it up for some questions and see what you guys think. I see one here.
Awesome. Yeah. That was really great, Above Average Joe. Thank you so much. And yeah, we have some questions lined up, so I'm just going to bring them up one by one. So this one's actually from my little brother. So my little brother is tuned in watching. From a beginner's perspective, he's curious, what is DeFi and where's a good place to start learning? And what tools were helpful for you when learning this stuff?
DeFi stands for decentralized finance. And back in the day, there was a whole thing about, is that accurately? Is it more accurate to call it open finance? But memes are powerful. And that was the meme that stuck. So decentralized finance is what we call it, even if it's not the technically most accurate term. As far as where's the best place to start learning, DAOs. I know that they aren't necessarily the most popular thing in the modern narrative because we're all fighting coordination failure, but you will surround yourself by people who are as steeped in the industry as you are, and you will find people that have common interests. You will expose yourself to developing skill sets and talents to serve those organizations that you wouldn't have otherwise. It'll prompt you into growing. And what you learn by doing in those sectors is education that may not show up in a course anywhere. As a matter of fact, it may lead to you being the one that creates those courses in the future. So get plugged in on the social level. I spent 5 years in the beginning of my journey without anybody to talk to about crypto. I didn't know anybody else that owned it. I didn't know anybody that even talked about it. And it wasn't until I broke through that barrier that I really began my crypto journey. So get plugged in. And one of the easiest places you can do that is a DAO. That's something you can do from home. But if you've got a little bit of travel in you, come to places like ETH Denver, where we're going to be in a few weeks. And you will just drown in a mass of people that understand this to varying degrees and can provide perspectives that you will not get elsewhere. And
yeah, Nikki, we're trying to get Nikki out for ETH Denver next week. So yeah, and Nikki has heard all about DAOs from me for the past couple of years. So like, he's definitely aware of the DAO space. And yeah, I hope to see him getting more involved. He's just ready to like kind of dip his toes in the water and learn a little bit here and there.
Yeah, there's a lot to do. And that is one of the challenges. There is a lot. And not every project is going to be able to get your time because there's just too many of them. So I've always advised people, plug into somewhere that you're passionate about and somewhere that you're skilled in to share your skills with somebody else who's passionate about it. And that gives you a twofold interface to work in the crypto industry. It'll upskill you. It'll create a reputation for you, and it'll eventually lead to you doing something that is more fulfilling day by day. And when it comes to the tools you use, start simple. Use asset aggregators and portfolio managers like Zerion or Zapper. And those guys will help you understand what's in your wallet and help you surface opportunities that are more valuable. It's hard to know which project's the scam and which one's legit. Mm-hmm. And so I'm loath to specify any individual project.
Right.
But if you start at the base layer, things like the layer twos, like Arbitrum, then you'll find yourself surrounded by people who are focused on the ecosystem rather than a specific tool within it. Mm-hmm. And as you get more familiar with the ecosystem, you'll learn which tools are potentially useful for you, and you'll be more inclined to investigate them. And people like Boring Security will help you teach the siloing of your risk. So when you go play with a brand new protocol, you're not doing it with a wallet that has all your money in it. You're only doing it with that $100, and you're keeping your risk contained. So
that is a great advice there, Joe. I do have a couple other questions coming in. I have a two-part question here, and I'll just share this question from Tomoko before we go on to Zyzen. So this actually came from our chat that we have with one of our students who is asking a question. And let's see, I guess the beginning part of this, before we get into Tomoko's, is Myth is asking, we're trying to build a crypto wallet, but as you know, many wallets are already there outside. I'm trying to include some self-showcasing socials. What else can we include while building a crypto wallet and help ourselves stand out amongst other wallets? And Tomoko added on to that. We're basically just looking for feedback on a wallet idea. We don't know if this is your wheelhouse, but But yeah, any thoughts on what current wallets are missing? And what would you like to see in new wallets that would help provide more security from scammers?
So a great example I'd like to point to is Pocket Universe, which is an add-on extension to most wallets. And those guys have essentially created a system such that when you create a new transaction in any given network, it pulls up a human readable version of that call data before you get the transaction signature in your wallet of choice. So if you're getting ready to create a malicious approval, it will pop up a big warning that's like, hey, are you sure you want to do this? Because this is what that transaction is going to do to you. And being aware of that as a trader and taking the time to actually see that rather than just FOMO your way through the button clicks and then find out you sent all your money to somebody else through a malicious approval is super valuable. The ability for a user to protect themselves is only as good as their awareness. So create that awareness. Give them the tools they need to be well informed.
Yeah, that's absolutely great advice there. Thank you so much, Joe. And yeah, let's go over to the next two questions. So, okay, we have a question from one of our student members, Zyzen. So Zyzen saying that they came in the middle and doesn't really understand, but why does BanklessDAO need a BanklessDAO token? What is it used for and what can it do? And then there's a second part to that question I'll share after this.
Okay, so BanklessDAO was spun out from Bankless HQ. We are two completely different entities. And this is because the guys at Bankless HQ, Ryan and David, they love making their podcasts and their newsletters and creating this wonderful content that teaches things about being crypto native, heading west on this journey. But they don't really want to be power people. They're not looking to control everybody around. They want to encourage sovereignty, not strip it away. And those of us who are believers in that mindset and ideal said, we want to coordinate because there's so much here. We want to get involved. We want to do things that make the world more bankless. And so they said, all right, if you guys want it, we'll give it to you. And so they issued a token, which is a coordination mechanism. And there are different types of implementations when it comes to tokens. You've got protocol-driven DAOs, which are things like Polygon even, that are designed around maintaining the product. But then you've got the social, which is what BanklessDAO is. We don't have a protocol. We don't have a base layer of something financial to interact with. We're trying to coordinate a bunch of people who have never met Tim before that believe in like-minded things. And it gives us a way to say, let's accrue value here, and then we can use that to make our mission a reality. And so when it comes to the token, it's a coordination mechanism. And would we have worked together without that? Maybe. But we had a Discord before we launched the token. We were all in that Discord, but we weren't working together. We just, cheered it on. When we had a token, we suddenly started getting down to business and doing some work. And being able to go from just on the sidelines in the stands to being in the field making the plays is a game changer for everyone involved. And most of those people have moved into other sectors of the crypto industry such that I think we have one of the most powerful social networks in the Web3 space. And that network pays dividends all the time. If I want to get a meeting with somebody inside of Uniswap, I don't have to try very hard because I know somebody that is related on that side. And they're bringing the perspectives of what it means to be bankless to these places. They're helping present that nuance and share it throughout the rest of the industry. And by creating this social network that ties these different things together, we're also creating coordination between protocols. So I mentioned Uniswap. I've mentioned things like Polygon. We've got people in both places. If those guys want to work together, they don't have to do cold DMs to try and get the doors open. We just say, hey, can you reach out to your BDAO fam?
Yeah.
See what doors open? And so the doors don't just open, they fly off their hinges because we know that we are aligned, and that is critical.
Yeah, being a member of BanklessDAO has seriously connected me to so many different people from all walks of life. It really is just like an amazing meeting ground for all sorts of people in the Web3 space. Definitely recommend joining for our weekly community calls on Friday. If you're not in the BanklessDAO Discord, we are going to drop those links in our newsletter and the description in this video. And I do have some more questions coming in, Joe. I guess this is the second part for Zyzen's question. Then we have a couple more coming in after that. So Zyzen says Bitcoin maxis have a negative view of other tokens, saying the other tokens create inflation. What do you think about that?
I think there is an argument for that. It's not necessarily always accurate. So you look at Ethereum back in the day whenever I first found out about it, and it was inflationary. There's new issuance happening because it ran off of at that time, hybrid of proof of work and proof of stake, and eventually moved to a full proof of stake model. And that meant that rather than a finite issuance of the 21 million Bitcoins, there was new tokens coming into the market and the supply cap didn't exist. It could, in theory, have gone to billions of Ether over the years. But then we did things like EIP 1559, which changed the tokenomic modules. Now, they've definitely got their concerns when it comes to your system is not immutable when it comes to issuance, therefore it is not secure. And that's a social contract thing. I don't want to dive down that rabbit hole quite yet. But when it comes to the issuance of Ethereum since the IP 1559 and the merge, we've actually become mostly deflationary. And so it's not always true. But then you get things that are like Shiba. Those kinds of assets are on a completely different level. And it does not necessarily work in someone's favor. It can lead to issuance being an entirely different animal. And admittedly, I'm out of the loop in terms of what their tokenomics are on things like Shiba. But back when I first heard about it and it was a worthless token on 4chan, they were swapping around thousands of it with no expectation of monetary value because it was a meme coin. And so the supply didn't matter. And so memetics are definitely something to be considered in those equations. But the more sound your money is, the better. And that is why store of value is important, because if it's being inflated, it's not really storing your value. It's just eroding. And I see a quick question about the name of the extension. That's Pocket Universe.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. And yeah, we're getting to the last couple of minutes here. So let's try and get through a few more questions here. So again, we got Time joining. Thanks again, Time, for joining us and asking questions as always. So Time is asking, what is the best way to navigate the DAO space? How do you build up a DAO that is not involved currently or understand the process?
DAOs are as varied as the people that are in them, because they are a coordination mechanism. Arguably, the name DAO is a little bit of a misnomer, but it's, again, the meme that stuck. And for some things, it's accurate because it's a decentralized autonomous organization. But when we're looking at things that are more socially oriented, the autonomy comes from the collective decision-making process as much as from the supply of assets or things like that. And the way that those governance mechanisms work are wildly variable. So paying attention to what those governance mechanisms are and the pros and cons of each approach can do a lot to teach you about how to begin building up a DAO. If your objective is to create the most valuable token possible, then your approach towards DAO governance is going to be different than if it's something like BanklessDAO, where our objective is get bank into the hands of a ton of people and show them what sovereignty means and create a more broad representative description of what our financial future should look like. when it comes to learning to understand the process, you'll never learn more than by doing. And so get plugged into the DAOs that are having these governance experiments. Get plugged into things that do public goods funding like Gitcoin, and start seeing what the landscape looks like. The more exposed to the different approaches you get, the easier it becomes to understand when an approach is the right thing to do.
Awesome. Yeah. And Joe, I love that you continuously touched on the learn by doing piece. That's a huge philosophy at the University of Ethereum. We want to encourage and even challenge everyone who's listening to actually think about how you can apply the skills you've learned here, right? Take this knowledge and actually go out there and learn by doing, right? And I want to get through the other questions from time if we have the time. So let's see. He asks, do you invite the DAO to join other DAO communities? And how do you go about collaboration? I would say here, I'll just comment here because I've been working in the DAO space for a bit. I would say on an individual basis, right? You have a lot of DAO contributors that work in a very self-sovereign way who contribute on multiple projects, which kind of creates this cross-pollination, like a network effect, right? So I'd say different DAOs work together in that way through having like common denominators of people contributing, right? There's also partnerships, right? Depending on the DAO, depending on its purpose, depending on its mission, they can actually work with other DAOs. And I'll let Joe kind of elaborate on this here too.
Yeah. Inviting the DAO to join other DAO communities is definitely a thing, both outside in and inside out. Like we have the DAOplimats, which is our organization making a collective representative effort in other projects. There are things where we have more direct partnerships. One that I'm involved in is Human DAO. Those guys were looking to leverage the social skills of Bankless to help create a more equitable future for those who are in impoverished parts of the world. And so they reached out to Bankless saying, we want to borrow some of your social capital. So we want to give you exposure to our asset class so that you guys have a little skin in the game to help support us and influence our own decision making, because we believe that what you guys are aligned to is in tune with what we want to accomplish. And just like any modern deal making system of barter or other form of trade, it's about finding something that's mutually beneficial and then finding a path to make it real. And so there's usually a need on one side or another that the other party can serve. And once we discover what that is, we explore how to make it real in the way that best benefits both parties. And that coordination rather than competition is, in my opinion, where DAOs show themselves to be superior.
Absolutely, dude. Yeah, you're definitely speaking my language here. And I like to say it's really about unlocking symbiotic relationships, right? Like finding a way that we can all support each other and going farther together. I feel like that's really been the ethos that really emanates from the DAO space. Yeah, we got about one more minute here. I saw time at another question as well. So Joe, would you say that pay to play is the best way to navigate away from a scammer? And if so, why use Bitcoin for security purposes? Because the fee to play is more.
I'm not 100% sure I fully understand that question. I would say that the opportunity cost for a scammer is definitely something that raises the barrier and can make you more secure, but that's a double-edged sword. It also means that it's more challenging for you to have efficient capital movement. And that's part of why I use the Arbitrum network for most of my on-chain activity these days. It's a more efficient, lower pay-to-play area that, as long as I am vigilant about what I'm doing inside of that ecosystem, I don't have to worry as much. But while I'm still learning, that higher barrier does reduce the amount of scammer activity. But the moment you have more value to be captured than the cost of making that effort, they're going to come after you. So you've got to keep your head down.
Absolutely. And yeah, we are at the end of our time here. I was looking to get the boring security link up. Eureka John, if you're able to share that link, I just want to encourage anyone listening today to actually take these resources and skills that Above Average Joe has taught you here today and actually take those out there into the real world and apply them. So yeah, Joe, we like to end off with any parting words of wisdom for any of our students listening and our members at the University of Ethereum. So take it away, Joe.
Well, I am bankless as they come. And at Bankless, we have a saying, we're headed west. It's not for everybody, but we're glad you're here with us. And we look forward to seeing what we do together.
Awesome, Joe. Well, thank you so much for coming up today and for putting all the work into your presentation. We really enjoyed having you on. And yeah, we'll see you all, everybody, next week. And happy Valentine's Day. If you have the opportunity to spend time with your loved ones today, definitely do so. And we appreciate you all that continue to tune in for these. Thank you, guys.